Hi, my name is Michael, and this is quite a departure from what I usually do. Because today I'm not going after a bad story. Today, well, you'll see. Spoiler alert, there will be math. So, in December of 2024, Pastor Will Duffy organized a so-called The Final Experiment. He invited a group of flat earthers, those people who try to convince other people that the earth is flat, and yes, they still exist. And also he invited some normal people to go to Antarctica and witness with their own eyes the sun making a full circle in 24 hours, never once setting below the horizon. Which apparently is hard to explain on a flat earth. The experiment was a huge success. One of those flat earthers abandoned his previous beliefs immediately, and the whole flat earth community was shaken pretty badly. Of course, they didn't work on everyone.
Satan has a lot invested in this.
You don't think you would go? Okay, boys. Y'all head on down there to Antarctica. I'll be there on this day. I'll clear the weather up for you.
And I'll be the angelic light in the sky.
Still, it was quite an achievement. Honestly, I'm a bit jealous at Will Duffy, who had both a nice idea and the resources to implement it. He certainly carved a niche for himself in the history of science. Unfortunately, then it turned downhill. In a somewhat bizarre way, I would say. Remember I said I am a bit jealous? I think somebody else was as well. Enter Simon Dan, a prolific flat earth debunker with a popular YouTube channel. Simon Dan proposed another experiment and asked his followers to help carry it out. The purpose of the experiment was twofold. One was to measure the radius of the Earth, recreating the observation by Eratosthenes. The other was to offer additional proof that the Earth can't be flat for a fraction of TFE cost. So let's talk about what Eratosthenes did for a minute. The gist of it is this. He noticed that in one city on a certain day, the sun was shining to the bottom of the deepest well, meaning that it was directly overhead. But in another city, almost exactly to the north of the first one, it never got above a certain altitude. So here is a diagram of what was going on. Now, the light rays from the sun are nearly parallel. Well, not quite, otherwise we would see the sun as a dot, and we don't, but very nearly so. Therefore, this angle is pretty much the same as this angle, which Eratosthenes measured directly. If we know the radius of the Earth, the distance between two cities can be calculated using a fairly complicated mathematical process of multiplying the radius to the angle. The only caveat is that the angle should be measured in radians, not in degrees, so it won't be, say, 5 degrees, but about 87 thousandths of a radian. Eratosthenes didn't, however, know the radius of the Earth, that's what he wanted to find. He was able to reverse this process, dividing the distance by the angle. So, in order to repeat that, Simon Dan picked two of the observations made by his followers, also being almost at the same longitude, divided the distance between them by the difference in angles, and got the radius of the Earth. Well, it was a bit more convoluted than that, but that's the idea. Success? Well, not quite. See, if you really squint at the formula for the radius, you might notice that it does indeed require the distance between observation points. For Eratosthenes, it was quite a simple problem. He just paid someone to physically walk between those cities and count the steps. It wasn't a perfect way of measuring distances, but it worked. Simon Dan, on the other hand, never said where he got those distances from. And I'm pretty sure that if he paid someone to physically measure those, or if he did it himself, he would have mentioned it. By the way, he frequently brags about his running prowess, so maybe he can even run on water between those locations, I don't know. My guess, just a guess, is that he got the distance from Google Maps or Google Earth or Google whatever. Do you know what else he could have Googled for? Yeah, exactly. The radius of the Earth. So, by deferring to Google to provide the distances, Simon then effectively nullified the whole thing. Anybody who wants to challenge his findings can easily do so by questioning Google-provided distances. The whole argument is no more convincing than just Googling the answer. And if you trust Google to give you correct distances, why wouldn't you trust Google to give you the correct radius in the first place? Even if Simon Dan used some other source rather than Google to get those distances, you could argue that that source got it from Google, or maybe Google got it from that source, or maybe they both got it from somewhere else, and you're back to the whole global conspiracy discussion that flat earthers are very fond of despite its ridiculousness. There was another goal, which was disproving, again, the flat earth nonsense. Simon then claims, correctly, that his data fits the globe model pretty well, no problem so far. But he also claims that his data just can't fit the flat earth model. And here we have a problem, because it can. Let's make something clear first. There is a possibility of disproving flat earth, or at least damaging it severely, with just one observation of the sun's elevation. See, flat earthers claim that the sun disappears at night not because it goes below Earth, but because it goes so far that you can't any longer see it. If it were to disappear under Earth, then, well, there would be night everywhere on Earth, which is laughably easy to disprove. Well, that's not how light works, but okay. So, the observation I'm talking about is the observation of the sun's elevation being 0. It would be rather hard to explain why half of the sun is so far away, so small that you can't see it, while the other half is perfectly visible. I don't think flat earthers can reconcile sunsets at sea with their view of the Earth's shape. Well, I can because I'm smart, but I'm not a flat earther because I'm smart. That's for another video. This observation, unfortunately, is impossible to make using Simon Dan's method, which is measuring the shadow of a stick together with that stick's height. So, what he has is a bunch of reports of sun being somewhere above the horizon. Let's take a look at 3 locations he examines more closely, 2 that we've talked about already, and another one that is very close to them in longitude, so that he uses it to double-check the results. I would rather arbitrarily place our sun at 5,000 kilometers above the flat Earth. In this case, the first location, in Finland, should be at the distance 3,775 kilometers from a point where the sun is directly overhead, to give us the correct angle. The second location, in Poland, should be at the distance 2515 kilometers. And the third location in Greece should be at the distance 1329.5 kilometers. So, the distance between the first and the second ones would be 1260 kilometers, and the distance between the second and the third ones would be 1185.5 kilometers. We see that the distances we get are not the same as Simon Dan tells us, but again, we don't have to believe the distances provided by Google. Otherwise, we could just Google "is flat Earth correct?" Also, note that while the distances aren't the same, they are kinda in the same ballpark. So that calculation does fit pretty well with a flat Earth model. And that's how it is. That's how you put those 3 points to a flat Earth map, and it's just as easy for all the other points. This could be salvaged though. Suppose Simon Dan's followers would repeat the measurement during winter solstice. That second experiment did not happen yet, but we can guess what the results would be because we have the globe model, the correct one. In that model, the difference between sun elevation at winter and summer solstices is always about 47 degrees. Therefore, in Finland, we would have about 6 degrees elevation, in Poland about 16 degrees, and in Greece about 28 degrees. So, assuming the sun would still be at 5,000 kilometers, which is not a given, but we will deal with that later, Finnish location would be about 47,600 kilometers from the point where the sun is directly overhead. Polish location would be about 17,400 kilometers from it, and Greek location about 9,400 kilometers. So, distance from the first location to the second one would be about 30,200 kilometers, and from the second to the third, about 8,000 kilometers. That is wildly different from the previous calculation, but we can try to adjust by claiming that the sun is lower than 5,000 kilometers during the winter solstice. But regardless of how high the sun would be, Finnish location would always be almost 4 times as far from the Polish one as the Greek one. While at summer solstice, when Simon Dan's experiment took place, they were roughly at the same distance. That indeed would be almost impossible for flat earthers to explain. But the problem is, Simon Dan did not say, okay, first part's done, let's wait for half a year and do the second. He needs that second measurement, but instead he already declared victory, which is simply not there. His video is even called "Community Science Just Destroyed the Flat Earth." It didn't. And here's the thing. Anybody can do experiments. Anybody can make observations. Those are all equally valid. But when you start interpreting them, you have to be careful not to just pick one interpretation you like and discard all the others. Otherwise, you're no better than a flat earther. Because that's exactly what they do. Like when they notice tiny particles flying off the astronaut's spacesuit and declare that those are obviously air bubbles and therefore ISS is in a pool, not in space. Like that. They don't consider the possibility that those are pieces of ice. You need to examine other explanations and actively try to find them. It doesn't really matter that you are right. What matters is that you remain vigilant. That, by the way, was done during the final experiment. A YouTuber by the name of Dave McKagan foresaw quite a lot of ways flat earthers can try to debunk TFE. And while in Antarctica he made dozens of additional experiments, eliminating all of those. Simon then failed to do the same. In my limited experience, that kind of scientific rigor is cultivated in universities. The real benefit of higher education is not that it gives you facts, it is that it teaches you how to do science properly. That's all I have to say. We'll see you next time. Bye.